All right, hello everyone. Welcome. I'm John Powers. I'm the Associate Director of VCU's STS program. And welcome. This is a multi-purpose event, a intersectional event, an intersection between VCU's STS program. It is the third event in our 2017 and 18 speaker series called Science Fact, Science Fiction. It is also part of a two-event collaboration with VCU's Humanities Research Center. The two-part event is called Frankenstein Dissected, and it is a couple of panel discussions we are hosting in honor of the 200th anniversary of Mary Shelley's novel, Frankenstein. Okay, I have several people to thank before we get going. First off, I would like to thank the Humanities Research Center for collaborating with us and its director, Richard Godbeer. I would like to thank the Department of Kinetic Imaging and the chair of Kinetic Imaging, Pam Turner, for also co-sponsoring this event with us today. We have three speakers today. How the layout of the event will go is that each of them will have an opportunity to give a little talk for about 15 to 20 minutes about their material, and then we will have a discussion that will be open to the audience, moderated by the director of the STS program, Dr. Karen Rader. Okay. As for our speakers, just going to announce them all at the beginning so I don't have to interrupt in the middle of, when all the action and all the good stuff starts happening. Our first speaker is Isiah Lavender, if you could, there he is. Isiah comes to us from the English department at Louisiana State University, where he teaches and does research on American literature with a specialty on race and science fiction. He's the author of a monograph called Race in American Science Fiction, which came out in 2011, and he is the editor of two collected works from 2014, Black and Brown Planets, The Politics of Race and Science Fiction, and a volume that he is currently working on called Yellow Planets, Racial Representation of Asia in Science Fiction. His current research, his book research, is a monograph on classics in Afrofuturism. Our second speaker is Youngmoo Kim. Youngmoo has a fascinating background, actually. Receiving, as a student, he received both bachelor's degrees and master's degrees at the same time in music performance and engineering. Let's take a minute to wrap your brain around that. Before getting a PhD in media studies. He is currently the director of the Expressive and Creative Interaction Technology Center, or Excite Center for short, and it also works at the Music and Entertainment Technology Laboratory, or MET Lab, at Drexel University. At the Excite Center, he sponsors programs which bring together multidisciplinary researchers from diverse fields, such as engineering, performing arts, computer science, fashion design, healthcare, and digital media. And he brings them together for the purpose of fostering innovative connections, inspirations, and collaborations. At the MET Lab, Dr. Kim focuses on machine understanding of audio signals, and also human-machine interfaces for expressive interaction. Our third speaker is our very own Jennifer Rhee, who is a member of VCU's English department and a core faculty member for the Media, Art, and Text PhD program here at VCU. She studies the influence of science and technology on art and literature and their sort of interactions. As she says, science and art are always in conversation. She has written and presented on topics such as big data, drones, cultures of surveillance, Turing tests, and I've also noticed one of her favorite subjects happens to be one of my favorite science fiction writers, Philip Dick. You know, she talks about, you know, sort of real realities and virtual realities, but of course in the world of Philip K. Dick, what's the difference? That's an insider's joke. She is currently working on a book on emotional robots, and I won't say any more about that because she's going to tell us some more about that. Those are our speakers. So as I said, what I'd like to do now is call up Isiah Lavender and let him say his piece.
Well, good afternoon, good evening. Before I begin, I'd like to say that I'm honored to be here at VCU. I'd particularly like to thank Karen Reeder for inviting me in the first place, but as I learned, I also have Jennifer Rhee to thank for reading my book and telling Karen about me, so thank you very much for that. And also Hannah Billings for making the arrangements to get me here. Without further ado, it's alive, the artificial half-life of Frankenstein's creature. I know the difficulty thinking about Frankenstein's monster as being a type of biological machine, but the monster is constructed by the hands of Victor Frankenstein from body parts, not all human, and sparked to life by the technological harnessing of lightning and the scientific application of chemistry, a feat of biochemical engineering second to none in the creative imaginary of literature. In fact, that's the reason why Mary Shelley is known as the mother of science fiction, according to Brian Aldiss in his Trillion-Year Spree, A History of Science Fiction. This novel, like no other, establishes science fiction as its own thing, its own genre, independent of the Gothic fiction that Shelley was trying to create on a dark and stormy night in Switzerland at the behest of Lord Byron, her husband Percy Bysshe Shelley, both celebrated romantic poets, and John Polidori, Byron's physician and creator of the vampire story, for this self-same challenge. Shelley remarks in her 1831 introduction to the novel, "When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. I saw the pale student of the unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then on the working of some powerful engine show signs of life, and stir with an uneasy half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world." No doubt enters my mind when I think of Shelley's creature in Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus as being a technologically derived ethnicity in a literal sense. The creature, monster, daemon, fiend, wretch, fallen angel, think Milton's 1667 Paradise Lost there, devil, and thing is faster, stronger, smarter, and more durable than any of us in every way. Technicity offers the chance to think about race in the genre in a radical way, where it is a possibility to consider the future evolution of humanity. I describe technicity as the integration of various technologies with humanity, which produces new ethnic forms out of men, women, and machines, i.e. post-humans and artificial persons. Victor Frankenstein is the modern Titan, a giant of scientific inquiry who stole the fire from the gods to give life to a different species of man, a superior species of man, and suffered the consequences for it at the hands of his nameless, unloved creation. Frankenstein himself egoistically declares, "A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs." And this exclamation to me reads as if it is the beginning of something new, something post-human, well before the concept of post-humanity existed, some kind of undetermined technicity. Let me quickly highlight the creature's technicity concerning its speed, strength, and intelligence. In terms of speed, Victor sees the creature for the first time outside his laboratory on the ice fields of Mont Blanc and remarks, "I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance advancing towards me with superhuman speed." With respect to strength, the monster relates how it could have torn Felix de Lacy limb from limb as the lion rends the antelope upon rejection by the destitute French family, though it refrains from doing so. Regarding the creature's intelligence, there are many signs of a superior intellect, not the least of which is learning to speak and read while remaining hidden from sight in the hovel adjoining the de Lacy's cottage. However, I think its eloquence and reasoning demonstrate its profundity best when it reflects, "Of what strange nature is knowledge? No father had watched my infant days. No mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses. Or if they had, all my past life was not now a blot, a blind vacancy in which I distinguished nothing. From my earliest remembrance I had been as I then was in height and proportion. I had never yet seen a being resembling me or who claimed any intercourse with me. What was I?" The question again recurred, to be answered only with groans. Either this perceptiveness or how easily it manipulates Victor Frankenstein to follow it to the Arctic Circle, where it knows that Victor, full of rage and madness, cannot long withstand the cold temperature of the icy environment, are the best signs of its infernal genius. Its rejection by its creators upon opening its eyes scars the nameless creature. Although gruesome in appearance, the monster begins life as a mild being. This point should be remembered. It slowly becomes monstrous because of its continual rejection by Victor and by the humans in which it comes into contact. Is there any wonder it chokes to death Victor's little brother William, frames family war Justine Moritz for the murder who's executed for the crime, kills best friend Henry Clerval when Victor destroys the creature's companion halfway constructed, murders Victor's bride, Elizabeth, on their wedding night, as promised, resulting in the death of Victor's heartbroken father, and ultimately drives Victor to insanity and death, chasing after his superior creation across the icebergs of the North Pole. Technicity clearly marks the creature. But for the life of me, I cannot ascertain what technicity the creature fits. That is to say, what model best represents the creature. Not a robot, not an artificial intelligence, not a cyborg. The creature seems closer to a biological android, akin to the Nexus 6 replicants of Ridley Scott's monumental 1982 film Blade Runner. But then Shelley-inspired Philip K. Dick's classic Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, published in 1968, exactly 150 years after Frankenstein, which in turn enthused Scott to make Blade Runner in the first place. So that technicity designation can't be right for the creature either. I would say almost a clone because of its biomechanical construction, but the creature was not grown in a petri dish or a nutritional vat of some gelatinous goo. It was painstakingly assembled by Victor's own hands, using his hard-earned knowledge of chemistry, physiology, and anatomy, and galvanism. Certainly, this creature is a feat of biochemical engineering and science. Still, how would you classify it? Better minds than my own have attempted to answer this question, resulting in what Isaac Asimov termed the Frankenstein complex. In his robot stories, beginning with his 1947 astounding story, Little Lost Robot, later collected in his I, Robot, the Frankenstein complex refers to the paranoid fear of vengeance for immoral creation from biological to mechanical beings, according to the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction. We must ask ourselves what drives Victor to create the monster in the first place. Could it be how his own father scoffs at his young son's attraction to natural philosophy, considers it a waste of time, causing Victor's heroes to later become Cornelius Agrippa, occultism, Albertus Magnus, alchemy, and Paracelsus, astrology, As a teenager, Victor witnesses a terrible thunderstorm at the family retreat in Bellerive, accompanied by a natural philosopher who explains electricity and galvanism and how it destroyed the tree struck by lightning. At the University of Ingolstadt in Germany, Victor decides to study natural philosophy after hearing a lecture by Professor Waldman. Imagine a professor in this day and age with that kind of influence. That would be amazing. Okay. Anyway, Professor Waldman lectures him on the importance of chemistry and relates how scientists have performed miracles in penetrating into the recesses of nature, have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. This lecture touches Victor's soul to the extent that one by one, the various keys were touched which formed the mechanism of his being, that he decides, I will pioneer a new way, explore unknown powers, and unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation. Victor is drawn to the study of both physical and life sciences, particularly chemistry, to which he had an almost supernatural enthusiasm because he wants to answer the question driving him, whence did the principle of life proceed? Consequently, he had to study death and the decay of human flesh in order to better understand life. For Victor, a churchyard was merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, and his studies led him to vaults and charnel houses to examine the minutiae of causation as exemplified in the change from life to death and death to life. And so, where others failed, including his own scientific heroes, Victor succeeds at discovering the cause of generation in life, becoming capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. All by chapter 5 of the 30-chapter novel, I might add. All by chapter 5 of the novel proper, within its quasi-epistolary framing device, folded into a club story where we bear witness to the monster's creation from body parts, slaughterhouse waste, and electricity. A being of gigantic stature, that is to say about 8 feet in height and proportionably large. Shelley creates her scientific myth based on the bioelectric experiments performed on dead frogs by Italian physician Luigi Galvani, that places her creature well within the possibilities of cognitively based speculation as established by the most advanced sciences of the day in the 18th century, as science fiction scholar Carl Friedman claims. Importantly, electricity divorces Victor from his hero's beliefs in alchemy and whatnot. Only upon the creature's dull yellow eye opening does Victor realize his mistake after nearly 2 years of work. Its yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath, and its straight black lips horrify him. Victor flees the laboratory, then his bedchamber, and he abandons the creature without saying a word to it while thinking it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived in his Inferno. Thus, the story of revenge is set in motion. Science fiction is born, and the post-human horizon is attained, where human pride is in techno-scientific achievement becomes dangerous. We have seeming control of the natural world's resources, blinding us to the world itself and the ability to experience deeper truths. To answer what category I think the monster fits, the creature is a scientifically constructed post-human, calculated in its design from organic material representing a new technologically derived ethnicity, stripped of human compassion because of fear, prejudice, and violence on our part. It's an artificial person, though biological at its core, and it has created all kinds of trauma. Faith, identity, normalcy, and difference, to name a few of these traumatic effects. In the 21st century world, as it gives voice to grave anxieties over the scientific improvement of mankind. Let me end with Victor Frankenstein's words. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world. than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow.
Thank you, Isiah. I'd like to invite Youngmoo Kim to come up and present.
Of course, my recollection is that Frankenstein is about, our fear of the advances in science and technology, particularly for those things that are somewhat human-shaped, human in form. Now, again, it's very easy to make the jump from that to our modern world of robots. So I work with robots, and I am here today to either assuage your concerns or to confirm your worst fears. You take your pick. I'm sure it'll be a little bit of both. So I direct this thing at Drexel University in Philadelphia. We call it the Excite Center, and we bring in lots of different disciplines. And this is what the Excite Center looks like on the inside. This is from a music hackathon that we did, music technology hackathon. That's one of the many things that we do. But I do a lot of work combining the arts and expression with actuated systems, technology, and robotics. So for lack of a better term, let's call it expressive robotics. That can take many forms, right? This little guy is called Darwin. It's a robot developed not too far from here, actually, in Blacksburg at Virginia Tech with a colleague of mine. And it's a small humanoid, about 18 inches. And we use it for a lot of different fun research projects. Is it going to go? Hold on. Let me do this again. So that robot has never looked that big. This is an enormous screen. It's great. I love this screen. So that robot is obviously dancing. And what's not clear from that video is that the robot's actually listening to the music and to determine the beat at which it should move. What is dancing? Dancing is, of course, moving in time with the rhythm, hopefully. In some ways, the robot already dances better than I do. But it's this question of how do we create expressive intent with a robotic or computerized system, right? Where is that line between those things that we ascribe to the domain of humanity, artistry, creativity, expression, and when does that start to look like, oh, that's emerging from our mechanical system? So that was a simple project where we gave it some basic dance moves, and then taught it to listen to the music to follow along. We have some bigger robots, too. We have very fortunate to have a decades-long partnership with the university in Korea, the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. And they make a robot design and manufacture a robot called Hubo. Hubo is about 5 feet tall, so we call it adult size. Adult-sized humanoids are still quite rare and very, very expensive. Most universities are fortunate to have one of them. We had a very large project, and we were able to acquire multiple robots. And this is one of the things we did with them. And again, it doesn't want to play correctly. Let's try it again. There we go.
He come moving up slowly. He got juju eyeball. He won holy roller. He got hair down to his knees. Got to be a joker. He just did what he pleased. Toe jam football, he got monkey finger, he shoot Coca-Cola, he say I know you, you know me. One thing I can tell you is you got to be free. Come together right now over me.
So we like to have a lot of fun with our robots. We had an incredible opportunity when we had multiple robots in our possession. Those have since been distributed. The whole purpose of this project is to share those robots as a common platform. Large humanoids, it's kind of like computers in the 1960s, where a university might have one of them, and it's a big shared resource, and it's very different from every other universities. So today's robots, large humanoid robots, there's Hubo, there's Honda has one called Osmo, Boston Dynamics makes one, a really scary one called Atlas. There are many other individual humanoid robots, but none of them share the same physiology, the same control, the same software. So by having 6 Hubos and sharing them with our research partners, we all have the same platform, and then we can leverage each other's software and algorithmic developments, which has continued. And that video was made about 2012, I think, 2013. So we've been working on that for about 5 years. One of the things, though, that we are really focused on in our research, this is Hubo, but looks very different now. One of the things about Hubo originally is it made to look kind of futuristic, this astronaut plasticky kind of thing. And what we discovered was that we would break those plastic shells all the time. Robots are not very good at knowing where they are and knowing not to bump into things. So they would, hit themselves or hit the table or whatever, and we'd crack these plastic shells, and they're not very protective. They're more decorative. We have, at our center, we have this amazing functional fabrics facility, a smart fabrication of textiles. And we started putting fabric on the robot, first as better protection for the robot, but then starting to build in things like new forms of sensing. Most robots have no sense of touch. If they do, it's usually at the fingertips. They've put special sensors right there. But if we envision a future where our robots are interactive, maybe they're helping out around the house, they're taking out your garbage, they're doing your laundry, you're going to need to be able to tap your robot on the shoulder or maybe grab it by the arm and pull it in a particular direction. Right now, our robots don't have that capability. But using smart fabrics, we were able to then build that sort of sensing into the fabric and easily deploy that on Hubo. So somebody touches it, and the robot, and he's not pushing it. He's just touching it, and the robot is moving away from that touch. So and that sensing happens right in the fabric using a conductive fiber within the fabric. So another way this is roboticists and fashion designers working together to create something that we weren't able to do before. The entire framework of everything we do, whether it's expressive robotics or a lot of our other work at the Excite Center, is this thing called STEAM, this framework called STEAM, right? Which is STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, everybody's heard of that, but integrating the arts and design. Not just to say to my engineering students, hey, go take a music class or a humanities class. No, that we can actually learn through integrated projects involving both technology and the arts. So we take that to lots of different levels. There's obviously a lot of interest in robotics. We get a lot of people in our robotics classes and our engineering programs, even at the high school level, right? There's a tremendous interest in robotics. But robots don't have to necessarily be humanoid either, right? What is a robot? A robot is a computer with motors, basically. It's a computer's extension into the physical world. So we have a summer program called Summer Music Technology. It's a one-week high school camp where we use music and music technology to motivate greater interest in science and engineering. So one of the projects that our students can do in this short one-week span is to build sort of musical robots and then perform with them. I love this one because he built a robot to play a virtual keyboard.
Kind of nice. Yep.
So this is a high school project done in about 3 days, about 6-7 hours of work. And the only reason he's holding on to something there is because he needs to have a little bit of conductivity to trigger the iPad, right? The iPad is based on skin connectivity. So that little wire helps that sense that touch there. We've taken that to different scales as well. Had a wonderful privilege of working with some great artists. This is a composer, Lembit Beecher. He was a former composer in residence at Opera Philadelphia and has had works performed around the world at various opera festivals. So he's a friend of mine, and he was interested in doing a new small chamber opera using sound sculptures, self-playing musical instruments. So, you know, these are robots. These are robots. So through this process of ideation, beyond that initial concept, we didn't know exactly what we were going to build. So he started working with me and my students to design these sort of sound sculptures that could create interesting sounds that he could use then in this composition. And we came up with this sort of percussive bike wheel. A lot of these were sounds of childhood. So it's sort of a self-turning bike wheel that you can put different things in the spokes to get different sounds. And then, of course, then the glass harmonicas, the wine glasses that play by themselves. So I'll show you a little. So that was an early sort of experiment we did, I think, more than a year ago, year and a half ago. And then the opera was actually staged in September. So we premiered this right after Labor Day. And you can see the sculptures in the back. There's a string quartet. This is a small black box theater, but this is a world premiere of an opera with 3 or 4 cast members, 3 or 4 amazing, amazing singers. The Isiah String Quartet, which is one of the quartets in residence at the Curtis Institute, and then these sound sculptures. Placed throughout. And again, what the video and the audio will never convey to you is what it's like when the sound sculptures are all around you, right? It's the sense of space as well as just the sound that they produce. So unfortunately, I don't have video. I'm not allowed to show video from the actual opera, but it happened, and it was really great. It was really a moving piece. Again, trying to tie art and new advances in technology together. Of course, you can't talk about robotics and advancing technology and fear these days without talking about drones. So yes, we do some drone projects. I was approached by a dance company in New York a couple of years ago, Parsons Dance. David Parsons is the founder and artistic director. Amazing modern dance company. These guys are just incredible dancers. But he said, hey, I want to do a piece with my dancers and drones, because that's obviously an emerging technology. There are a lot of concerns. I want to explore this artistically. And I said, that's crazy. Okay, let me think about that. Let's see if we can do something about that. So we premiered this work last December in Philadelphia. And it's doing that thing again.
I'm Youngmoo Kim, director of the Isiah Center.
You don't need to see the talking head. You can look at this talking head.
So
this project, obviously, we're using drones on a theater stage alongside human dancers. You can't remote pilot these things, or you can't remote pilot multiple drones in the same space. You will crash. It's almost a guarantee. So these are computer controlled. We had to install a tracking system inside the theater to very, very precisely position the drones, because we don't get GPS indoors, right? You don't get a satellite signal indoors. So we built the system that can choreograph and track these drones inside a theater space. So the premiere had 6 dancers and 2 drones. And then, of course, the dance company was like, that was great. Let's do more. So this is kind of work in progress now. I'll show you a bit from a rehearsal, a recent rehearsal. 6 drones. These dancers are my heroes because they are fearless. They are all wearing eye protection, as you can see. Being next to rapidly spinning blades, a few feet away from your head, that can be terrifying. And, you start to really question, is this a computer that I can trust or not? Right? Can it suddenly, it's kind of like being next to an animal at times, right? The dog looks a little scary. Do I trust going near it? This drone is acting a little scary, and it's really, really funny because everyone on our team, the engineers and the dancers, have had to go through sort of multiple stages of becoming acclimated to being around drones. The ones who have done drone work for a long time, know that there is a little bit of unpredictability to drones, but for the most part, they know how to handle that. But of course, the first time somebody sees the drones do something that's unpredicted and then crash, right? That certainly also creates a lot of uncertainty around that. In this piece, just to show you, they do actually get quite close. Right, this is one part of the work where the dancer and the drone are basically supposed to circle one another. Right? So that's actually quite close. But I'll close by saying this. Again, this piece, of course, there's some technological advancement and achievement with this. On the other hand, it's not anything. This wasn't an enormous, let's say, new research project, right? This is taking sort of existing technology and repurposing it and using a lot of expertise to do that. But there wasn't any new AI algorithm created for this. There was no brand new technology. This is taking what's readily available and just sort of repurposing it for this. But again, and David and I have talked about this a lot in our performances, talked about it a lot with our audience. Our reason for doing this, not only to bring this interesting exploration between these two cultures of dance and engineering together, but then really to explore sort of this technology and arts intersection. How is it manifesting in culture? When people see drones and dancers on stage, they start to ask some really interesting, have really interesting thoughts and ask some really interesting questions. And of course, in this day and age, when we can't necessarily predict the outcome of a technological advance like drones, right? I would like to think, again, I'll conclude with this. I would like to think that technology itself is not inherently good or bad. And of course, that there are nefarious uses of technology, and then there are very positive uses of technology. But again, looking at what's possible, looking how easy it is to do something fun and interesting and creative, and also maybe how easy it is to do something a little bit destructive, right? Certainly raises a lot of questions. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this piece and thought that it was really important that we do this piece. So those are just a couple of examples of our projects. Thank you very much. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you to the HRC, the STS program, and Kinetic Imaging for sponsoring this exciting event. And also I wanted to thank Dr. Rader and Dr. Powers in particular for organizing this and inviting me, and to Hannah Billings for all of her logistic work. And I'm so excited about all of the unexpected connections between my talk and the other two presenters. So, okay. This talk is based on my forthcoming book, All Too Human, Labor and Dehumanization in the Robotic Imaginary. It's currently in production right now with the University of Minnesota Press, and will be out early fall next year. So, Okay, in 1920, decades before robots emerged in laboratories, the robot was first named and imagined in Karl Čapek's play RUR, Rossum's Universal Robots. In this play, robots are doomed to a life of servitude to greedy capitalist humans, that is, until the robots revolt. The word robot, suggested to Čapek by his brother Joseph, is derived from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labor or drudgery, and from robotnik, the Czech word for slave. So from the robot's inception, Čapek's formative and influential robotic imagining entangles robots with labor and oppression. Drawing on this originary entanglement, my book, from which this talk is drawn, traces the ongoing relationship between robots and devalued and exploited labor. Today, I'm going to talk about emotional robots in technology, literature, and art. Drawing on the historic relationship between robots and labor, I'll look specifically at the ways emotional robots point to emotional labor and the power relations in which this labor is imbricated. I'll argue that emotional robots in technology and culture highlight the normativity that structures demands for emotional labor, as well as the significant stakes of responding or not responding to these demands. In the 1990s, roboticist Cynthia Brazil developed Kismet, a groundbreaking sociable robot that communicates with humans through emotion. Kismet was funded by DARPA, or the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency that is part of the Department of Defense. Kismet's emotional range is comprised of anger, disgust, fear, joy, sorrow, surprise, boredom, interest, and calm. The robot functions by reading humans' facial expressions, tone of voice, and distance to determine which of its 9 emotions is being conveyed and which emotion would be most appropriate to express in response. Kismet only knows 9 emotions, each of which has a specific facial expression associated with it. As humans interact with Kismet, the robot becomes increasingly deft at recognizing and expressing its emotions. Likewise, humans are also entrained to become increasingly deft at reading Kismet's emotions and making their own emotional expressions legible to Kismet, though this is achieved only after a considerable amount of time training with the robot. This human-Kismet interactivity, I contend, is a form of emotional labor, the stakes of which I'll discuss momentarily. Arlie Hochschild defines emotional labor as, quote, the management of feeling to create a publicly observable facial and bodily display, end quote. In her landmark study on the emotional performance required of Delta Airlines flight attendants, Hochschild describes how Delta employees are trained to express certain emotional states in order to produce positive emotions in the airline's customers. So in this training session, the employees are trained to always smile, exclamation point, smile, right? According to Hochschild's definition, emotional labor requires people to modify their emotional states and expressions in order to make them legible within a prescribed framework, for example, the marketplace. The interactivity between Kismet and humans is also a form of emotional labor. It's the work of reading another's emotion within a prescribed emotional framework, responding with an appropriate corresponding emotion, and making this emotion legible to another, who in this case happens to be a robot. Kismet, like its evolutionary descendant Leonardo, relies on psychologists Paul Ekman and William Frieson's facial action coding system, or FACS, which measures human facial expression and movement. Ekman and other researchers have mapped facial expressions to various emotional states, thus suggesting that certain truths of an individual's interior life, here their emotions, can be read on the exterior of the body. Ekman specifically argues that the that the experience and expression of 6 emotions is universal across humans, cultures, and geographies. Ekman's 6 emotions are anger, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, and happiness. In the 1960s, Ekman, also funded by a DARPA grant, began his work on the universality of emotion expression. Ekman's theory about emotions' universality has been influential both for scientific research on emotions and for technologized policing practices, such as the TSA's controversial SPOT program, which stands for Screening Passengers by Observation Techniques. Ekman and his influential research also inspired Lie to Me, a television series about a charismatic psychologist played by Tim Roth and his team of trained experts who can read facial microexpressions to detect lies and solve crimes and mysteries. Anybody familiar with that television show, Lie to Me? Some? Okay. Though undeniably influential, Ekman's claims about the universality of emotions have been persuasively challenged. To date, psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett offers perhaps the most detailed and compelling challenge to theories of universal emotion expression, including Ekman's. Based on her own extensive research on emotions and emotion expression, Barrett holds that emotion expression is not universal. In fact, according to Barrett, it's just the opposite. The emotions are characterized primarily by variation, not just across cultures and humans, but also within a single individual. Quote, on different occasions, in different contexts, in different studies, within the same individual and across different individuals, the same emotion category involves different bodily responses. Variation, not uniformity, is the norm. Quote. According to Barrett's analysis, the studies grounding and supporting Ekman's claim were biased by the language used to survey individuals, from using forced choice response structures to testing in cultures that were already familiar with Western cultural norms. While Ekman concluded that the universality of emotion expression is proven throughout his studies, most famously those conducted in Papua New Guinea, Barrett underscores the decidedly Western and able-bodied conception of these 6 purportedly universal emotions and their corresponding expressions. Barrett's important challenge to the purported universality of emotions takes on particular resonance in light of Ekman's collaborations with police forces, the CIA, and the Department of Homeland Security. With the help of Ekman's research, these institutions operate under the premise that the face betrays the truth of an individual's interiority and identity. Over the course of his career, Ekman has researched and developed technologies that train individuals to express and recognize his universal emotional states in others. For example, his 527-page facts manual can be purchased online for $350, and a corresponding certification test can be taken for $50. So here on the website. One might say that Ekman's investment in training humans in emotional communication, in other words, his requests for their emotional labor, creates the purported universality of emotions on which his business ventures, government collaborations, and surveillance and security techniques are premised. For example, the aforementioned SPOT program trains TSA officers to identify potential terrorists using behavioral profiling based on Ekman and Frieson's facts. According to the LA Times, since 2007, the TSA has spent over $1 billion implementing the program and has deployed approximately 3,000 behavior detection officers in airports throughout the US. The SPOT training program is a mere week-long training session and does not address individuals' biases and preconceptions that can lead to racial profiling. As of a report published in 2015, the SPOT program had not successfully identified a single individual with terrorist intent. Instead, its implementation has led to charges of racial profiling in a lawsuit from the ACLU. The TSA continues to employ SPOT despite reports of racial profiling, particularly of Muslim and Arab travelers, despite the program's striking lack of results, and despite numerous scientific findings, including Barrett's, that contradict the scientific claims that ground Ekman's facts. Humanists have also persuasively argued that the emotions, their expression, and how they're read by others are not universal, but are in fact shaped by relations of power, particularly as they speak to race, gender, and disability. For example, the work of Sian Nye, Kathleen Woodard, Sarah Ahmed, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, and Sue Kim, just to name a few. In conversation with this work, Kiran Mirchandani notes that many earlier studies of emotional labor, including Hochschild's groundbreaking study, display racial silences and is, quote, based on a concept of a universal woman that normalizes whiteness, end quote. And Patricia Chong's intersectional study details how the demands of emotional labor differ according to race, gender, and class, and exacerbate uneven power relations that benefit some by marginalizing others. This, of course, is an insight all too well known for some through lived experience. Because norms of emotional expression, like all norms, are shaped through unequal power relations and hierarchies, emotional labor is not neutral nor universal. Rather, according to Chong, emotional labor, quote, has the effect of naturalizing inequalities on an individual level and thus justifying oppression at large, end quote. Just as emotional labor is not neutral, neither is the demand for emotional labor, whether in the home, the marketplace, or at national borders. Ekman's theories and the technologies they shape, including Kismet, produce normative demands for emotional labor. What Ekman's applications ask of individuals is work. specifically the work of being an appropriately emotional individual and of making sure that this appropriate emotionality is legible to certain others. Emotional labor can discipline subjects into performing a specific version of the human, and the stakes are high, as those who are illegible as normative emotional subjects may be met with exclusion. For example, in the marketplace, by employers that demand specific forms of emotional labor from their employees, and at national borders, by government agencies that rely on programs like the TSA SPOT. What happens when someone does not or cannot do the work of making their emotions appropriately legible? What exclusions does this enable? What oppressions does this justify? In a longer book chapter, I argue that these are precisely the questions taken up by Philip K. Dick's novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which places the emotions and their legibility as the defining boundary between humans and androids. However, the novel does so only to highlight the normative impulses and exclusionary effects associated with the emotion's purported universality. Dick's novel, written during the late 1960s, challenges the universality of the emotions by depicting the injunction to perform and make legible appropriate emotions as a relation of power. Indeed, in the novel, the institutions and individuals who demand emotional labor are presented as the agents of dehumanization. Within this context, the novel places the onus of proving one's humanness not on those who are dehumanized at the sight of the emotions, the androids, but instead on those who demand emotional labor and determine the standards for this proof. And here in the novel, this would be corporate capitalism, the state, and humans who wield the power of the state. Placing the emotions at the boundary between humans and androids, the novel depicts the work of making oneself legible as human as emotional labor. The novel also depicts the demand for emotional labor as a shameful strategy of dehumanization and control, shaped not by universal truth, but by nefarious institutional dictate. In the world of the novel, the emotions are only ostensibly the basis by which beings are dehumanized. In actuality, dehumanization and subjugation at the site of the emotions function as post facto justifications for maintaining existing exploitative relations and for securing exploitative relations in the future. I don't have time to discuss Dick's novel at greater length, but I do want to mention two things. First thing, Dr. Lavender's concept of meta-slavery is incredibly useful to understanding the novel's depiction of the androids, an enslaved group treated as subhuman. Second thing is that the novel owes significant narrative debt to Shelley's Frankenstein, as Dr. Lavender pointed out, especially in the novel's destabilization of the human-non-human divide. So perhaps we can talk about this more during discussion. But for now, I want to conclude by turning to a robotic artwork that also works against claims of the universality of emotions and their expression. Aaron G's swarming emotional pianos reconfigures emotional labor around the production of a sonic performance. The piece harnesses human emotion using biosensors that measure heart rate, breathing, and sweat responses, all of which shift according to different emotional states. During the performance, method actors are asked to generate physiological responses by producing different emotions. Video. Oh, I don't think that's showing yet. That's all right. I'll just explain it, but thanks. This is the method actor emoting boredom. So this is the chimes. Okay, I'll keep that in the background just while we're talking. The biosensors, in conjunction with G's musical algorithms, relay commands to mobile robots. It's shifting to fear now, so get ready. The biosensors, in conjunction with G's musical algorithms, relay commands to mobile robots that are equipped with bells. These robotic musical instruments move and chime according to the biosensors' readings of physiological emotional responses. In the space of the performance, the piece creates an aesthetic experience that offers an alternative telos for emotional labor. Here, demands for emotional labor do not police, exclude, or monetize. Instead, they chime. As G notes in an interview, her work is based on emotion research that, like Barrett's, presumes the individuality of emotion expression across individuals and moments. Thus, the ephemerality of individual performances for the audience, the method actors, and the artist mirrors the nuanced specificity of an individual emotional state. G is explicit about the speculative dimension of her artwork. According to G, her work creates speculative imaginings that are of critical import, quote, in a historical moment when technologies are increasingly corporatized, normalized, and territorialized by capitalist systems of production and surveillance, end quote. G's work offers alternate relations with technology, putting emotion to work to create aesthetic experiences that imagine how human emotion might coexist with technology outside of normative and policing demands for emotional labor. I offer that this artwork, like Dick's novel, invites further speculative imaginings that take seriously human emotion and the power relations that shape emotional labor, while working against claims of the emotion's universality and the policing and monetizing practices that take up these claims. To return briefly to Kismet and Leonardo, Brazil imagines her sociable robots as friendly human companions who may one day be helpers in care labor industries, including healthcare, education, and elder care. In light of robotic technology's ongoing expansion in society, I argue that we continue to look to artistic robotic imaginings, like those demonstrated by Dr. Kim in his work, artistic robotic imaginings that speak to a more capacious concept of the human, one that refuses to police normative visions of the human around the emotions and is not shaped by racial silences, nor does it universalize whiteness. Instead, I look to work like G's and Dick's and Dr. Kim's, for example, that both conceptualize the human and human emotion through variation and difference while attending to the power relations that structure emotional labor. Thank you.
Okay. So we're on. Can you hear me? Did I turn it off? It's green. Okay. Green is on. Okay. You can. Oh, all right. So I'm Dr. Karen Rader. I'm the director of the STS program, and I'm going to moderate this discussion, but I think maybe with one mic. And then who's not mic'd? You're not mic'd.
But I believe we have. Is this
so
on?
we have to pass it amongst ourselves.
Are we on?
And out to the audience. Maybe the best way to start would be to sort of ask you if you wanted to respond to each other, because I think you each, I can see some crisscrossing and commonalities, but I think we're more interested in hearing you talk than me talk. So do you have any questions or comments for each other?
More I wanted to express my appreciation to be in conversation with Dr. Kim and his work, because I think the kinds of ways that he's bringing technology and art together is precisely what the ways that I'm thinking about and looking for, particularly, as you mentioned, because we're at this pivotal moment where technology can have such powerful effects on our lives, good or bad. And to Dr. Lavender, I was so taken, as you know, by this concept of technicity that you are using, and I was thinking about, because I'm a media studies person, that in Frankenstein, literature functions as a technology that shapes the creature just as much as the science and the medicine. And I was curious if to hear you speak maybe a little bit about the role of literature, and if for you it speaks to this concept of technicity.
Well, sure, yes it does. I can answer this in a couple of ways, or I will attempt to answer this in a couple of ways. First, I mentioned how Frankenstein is an epistolary novel, right? Oh, is this working? All right. We're fantastic. All right. Well, as an epistolary novel, it's a specific form. We know writing is a technology, paper is a technology, and Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley harnesses this technology by having Captain Walton hear the story that Frankenstein is telling him when he picks him up in the Arctic as he's dying, right? And he's writing a series of letters to his wife, or not his wife, his sister. We don't want that relationship out there, right? So that is one kind of instantiation of technology. I don't think this is working very well. Okay, but also within that is another type of story, a club story, where you have the captain hearing the tale, but not just as a captain there. His crew, or some of his crew, is in there listening to Frankenstein, and this seems to be a safe space, and this is, I guess, another motif within stories of the fantastic that you can see being developed. So not as technological as we would like, but thinking about how the creature, I hate that it's nameless, right? But thinking about how the creature learns how to read, I suspect he can probably write as well, though that never comes up in the text, but he speaks French. He's learning from a French family, right? And I don't know if in the novel that Victor Frankenstein is speaking Swiss or if he's speaking English. I'm going to assume English because, you know, he's talking to Robert Walden, who is the ship's captain. And so you see this technology working in itself and the superior intelligence of the creature able to teach itself reading and writing, not to mention getting clothing because he feels shame. He's so ugly, apparently. And also developing emotions and thinking about this. It's like a learning robot, in a sense, if we want to link in to the two next level ideas that you guys gave me. I mean, it's just, you know, the technological aspects of your work was impressive to me, who just reads literature and barely can operate a computer, right? So
Well,
that's dithering. I apologize.
well, I mean, I'd love to pick up on that just a little bit. And first of all, I forgot to mention just how thank you for having me, and I'm sorry for not mentioning that earlier. And because I never get to participate in discussions like this, because you know when you're working a lot in technology, you get a lot of technical conferences, technical discussions. But I think what a lot of people forget is that even in the modern day, when people are pursuing these technologies and these projects, right, we are so influenced by literature. We are so influenced by the stories of the past, of the recent past, of science fiction, right? A lot of, I mean, I don't know if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but a lot of the projects that happen, you know, the research that gets funded and the projects that people create, especially in robotics, are inspired by science fiction, right? Which again descends directly from, you know, Shelley and from many, many previous authors as well.
I think the idea of emerging technology, which is one you mentioned, is pretty interesting, right? Because it sort of invokes a temporal dimension, which also invokes the question, when is an emerging, like when does it happen? When does it stop emerging and become non-emerging? But there's still a way in which it seems in all of these presentations, kind of for me, because I'm a historian, but trying to understand that process and kind of how that metaphor gets invoked and why and when. And the way in which in your work, Dr. Kim, you blur this very productively. So for instance, you talked about the robots having two hearts. You talked about robot physiology. Yeah. So do you get challenged on that at all? Do you get, or maybe a better way would be to say, why do you do that?
Yeah, I guess we do it for two reasons. One is honestly to let people know a little bit more and find a way of engaging with a broader audience. Yeah. For that this is, you know, it's a machine. It's kind of quirky. We think it's kind of funny. I mean, I wasn't going to put out a music video that we thought, hey, this is a great piece of music, because the robots aren't capable of creating a great piece of music, right? We're going to put out something that's barely sort of passable in terms of music, but then how are we going to do that? It's got to have whimsy. It's got to have fun to it. And if we can teach people about the robots and how we made the video in the process, for that reason we do that. And then, you know, from, I mean, the more technical standpoint, right, we are trying to get, I don't know if this is the right way to say it. You know, I guess I'll say most people who do robotic technology work don't put out music videos, right? I don't think it's that common. So we are trying to get technologists also to think about different ways of presenting their work.
So about accessibility and kind of promoting the cross conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm sure you all have questions. Would anyone like to? Okay.
You do. I do, really? Okay. I have both a question and a comment for Jenny. Thank you for your really interesting perspective. First, the comment. I thought it's interesting this idea of G's creation of music through emotions, that they hired method actors who are, of course, themselves performing a form of emotional labor, right? It's an additional mediation. It's sort of interesting to me that it's that instead of actual people just emoting, as it were, in terms of physiology. But to think about Frankenstein for a moment, I'm really interested in thinking about the degree to which the creature is unable to make legible his own emotional labor. I mean, I might depart, Isiah, from your comment that he is stripped of human compassion when indeed one of Mary Shelley's points is the deep compassion of the monster that goes unread or is indeed illegible. So I'm wondering, Jenny, if you could talk a little bit about the monsters, or the creature, I hate to use the term monster, the creature's capacity for emotional labor, or the demands upon him, and the legibility or illegibility of that within the text.
No, thank you. That's absolutely. I read it as both a kind of illegibility, right, a tragic illegibility, and of the creature as an emotional being, and in part through what he was able to learn through language and literature, right? That's where he kind of learned to become human, right? But I also think that there was also a way by which he wanted to participate in the circuits of emotional labor, because that's what human sociality largely is, as it was depicted in the novel. And it was the lack of entry into those circuits, I think, that also that contributed to his alienation, right, or sense of alienation. So I actually think he wanted to participate in emotional labor, or in specific modes of emotional labor that he identified with being human, but wasn't allowed to.
Oh. Well, sure. No, I mean, I take your point. I think the creature does express anger, right, all the time. He's destroying things. He's murdering various people close to Frankenstein. So that's an expression of rage itself. But I'm often wonder about this book in that, okay, he wants a companion, he wants a female companion, but why didn't Frankenstein like make a dog or something? That, you know, a companion animal would have been, you know, I'm being funny, but not at the same time, because there are companion animals. People love and bond with animals, and that would have been an easy dodge for Victor to have made an animal that might have saved Elizabeth's life at the end. And remember, I'll be with you on your wedding night. That's what the creature tells him when he destroys this half-completed bride that you know, we always see in movies depictions. So I guess the creature is stripped of everything but a raw anger to a certain degree. Although he wants to bond with the DeLacy family, he's not able to because they're repelled by its repugnance, right? So, or at least I think so. And that's what drives him away. That's why he doesn't kill Felix. Well, I refrained from killing him because I recognize I'm ugly every time I look in a pond. And so maybe he can feel disgust too, but there doesn't seem much humanity in it at that point. Yeah.
Yes, my question is this. Have we become more greater in fear of science fiction that takes place in our own reality that brings the creation of it to life? Are we becoming more fearful of the things that we can visionarily see from a standpoint of creativity that actually can overcome us, and we face a reality of how much control we can have over it? That's my question to the gentleman here.
Oh, for me? Oh,
Dr.
you asked
Kim.
me the hard question. Okay. Wow. No, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think as things are emerging, you know, new technologies, whatever, obviously the world's changing very quickly, but as things emerge, right, you can only really in hindsight see, you know, that trajectory of where is it, you know, we can go back in time and look at, you know, inventions that we thought were great, really, you know, very positive, and of course, you know, again, I don't know how people feel about it. I mean, you know, automobile, certainly lots and lots of transportation, lots of mobility, all that, lots of pollution, right? Simple, that's a simple example. So I think with the emerging technologies of right now, I mean, the robotics, the AI in particular, I mean, you know, the robotics, I'll tell you how I feel personally, which is that the robotic stuff, if it's going to be really scary, it's still a long ways off. That the robotic, I actually have a joke I tell people around my lab is if you're scared of the robot uprising, just come to my lab and you'll see the robot can barely take 2 steps without falling over on its face, right? The physical control of this, it's just not very good. Skynet is not happening anytime soon. What is a little bit more scary is the rapid advance in artificial intelligence and the ability for computer systems to do things that, you know, a lot of us in the field thought that we were decades away from. We're really good at recognizing cat photos on the internet, right? We're really good, but recognizing things in images, recognizing faces, and that advance has happened very, very quickly. So I try to be, personally, I try to be a little bit philosophical about it. I think that throughout history, there have been periods of great, you know, great expansion, and then maybe a little bit of leveling off. There was an AI wave, you know, in the late 60s and early 70s, right, you know, and that kind of culminated in 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? And then there was, this is what the field calls it, the AI winter, right? Where there was this tremendous hype of AI, and then everybody said, oh, AI is not anything, it's not real. They cut all funding for it. They actually had to create a new term in order to get funding, machine learning. We started calling it machine learning because AI was so out of vogue. And then, of course, 25 years later, 30 years later, now it's on the rise again. So again, trying to take that historical context, I think there are going to be these ups and downs. I am personally very hopeful that the general trajectory is positive and not all of a sudden we're going to lose control of it.
But in the earlier framing of that question, you were talking about the creative aspects as kind of mediating that fear and addressing it. So even in the way you're talking about it, right? Talking about the different historical periods and then films and productions. And so it seems like you see that. You see what he's seeing.
Well, I don't claim to speak for the whole field.
Of course.
I mean, again, my center is about bringing people together from those different disciplines so we can talk about those things. Again, I think one of the true fears that I have is that, you know, as research is funded and promoted and advanced, that there are many programs, many laboratories that aren't having those conversations.
And in my research on the history of robotic technologies, I think one important part of your question, but not the only part, is examining the funding structures of various research programs and sites. So, for example, I noted that Kismet, and Leonardo, which seem very much like, you know, friendly robot toys, perhaps, right? And they're deliberately designed to evoke that, but they're also funded by the Department of Defense. And so in a recent history of DARPA, a robotic scientist who was funded by DARPA, the Defense Department's granting agency, said, everything you develop under DARPA will find its way into, actually I have the quote exactly, let me read it to you. Whether you like it or not, something you develop is going to find its way into a weapon system. It has and it will always, can't be stopped. So that's perhaps the other side of the spectrum to Dr. Kim's kind of hopefulness, but that's also out there, and it's directly tied to who's funding these projects, and therefore controlling what happens to the research.
That was actually something I was thinking about, and my daughter and I were talking about it too, that in some ways these whimsical robots, and these robots that seem almost laughable, they're falling over, they're cute, they're fuzzy, in some ways it masks some of the other possibilities. And I'm curious, particularly for Dr. Kim working with robotics, if there's a sort of conscious thought of this, that, how do we create robots, this would also be for you as well, like robots that appeal to people but don't bring out so many concerns about these other possibilities, even though the funding mechanisms clearly are connected, that it's not completely separate. And what was the question you wanted to ask? Do you remember? Yeah. Go ahead.
Why do some robots have emotions and others don't?
Or seem to have emotions, right?
Great question.
Or seem to have emotions.
So a two-parter.
Yeah. Let's see, why do some robots have emotions? I mean, that's actually a very difficult question. The short answer is because of how they're created and how they're designed, right? But I think the bigger question is we don't really know what emotion is. And that's a very difficult thing for us as humans or as scholars to define. And so to say whether a robot has emotions or not, it's hard to draw a line there. And again, I think Professor Rhee pointed to some of the great work that's been done on expression and trying to convey emotion like that, and also to sense emotion. And I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the first part of the question.
It's about the is there any kind of self-awareness?
Oh, the design. Yeah,
about the design.
Okay, so I'll point to this and I'll hand it to Dr. Rhee. There are lots of projects around sort of companion type robots. I mean, as you kind of brought up earlier, there are these Asian countries, particularly Korea and Japan, have invested a lot in robotics because of their aging population, because they see robots as a future solution to their lowering of their birth rate, right? There aren't enough young people to take care of the growing number of older people. So one of the most successful projects has been this robot pet, right? This robot seal, which, it's a seal. It's called Paru. And so it started as a research project, and I think they commercialized it. And basically, it's sort of, do you remember the Tamagotchi things from like 2 decades ago? It's kind of like a moving version of that you actually have to, care for it, do repeated actions. But again, for people, particularly the elderly living in assisted living facilities, it became sort of this unexpected companion for them. And there's ongoing research about that. And also to treat, also another class of robots like that used in autism therapies as well. So there are lots of different designs. But I think you probably can comment on some of those things too.
Yeah, in terms of your excellent question about why do some robots have emotions and some don't, my understanding of robotics research, and Dr. Kim, let me know if this, if your experience has been different. But so robotics technology, it kind of develops piecemeal, right? And by that, I mean, roboticists identify one problem to solve and then try to create around that, right? So for a while, it was being able to have a conversation with another human being. That would make sense, right? That wouldn't be nonsensical. And then for other researchers, for example, the emotional robots, the problem was, how do we create robots who will be companions, right? So the problem kind of defines what kinds of robots emerge from that, and in many ways, it is a kind of narrower kind of vision of human experience. So it's never, to my knowledge, there's no one robot that can do all of the things that all of these different specialized robots can do, because each attempt to work through a problem, a single small problem, well, single large problem, takes so much brain power and research and work to develop something that speaks to that single problem. So.
Well, I was going to say, what about a child's robot or toy? I'm thinking of my 7-year-old's Furby Connect, and he like has a relationship with it, and it talks back. Is this a robot or a toy? And I know it doesn't have emotions, but my 7-year-old was distraught when he dropped it in the tub, and we have to get another one for him now. So, I mean, I can look at that as being a companion for my child. So I find that interesting about these seals and children, adults, older adults living in assisted living facilities. So.
Well, we develop emotional affinity for inanimate things all the time, right? People love their cars, right? Or their, their chair or whatever. People develop these emotional attachments. I mean, I guess in the case of robots, maybe it's because they can do something back, right? That we start to ascribe even more. We tend to anthropomorphize a lot of things. But this area of companions and of emotional robots is a really, really interesting area because a lot of people think that, hey, a pet should be easy, or in the robot scale between humanoid and pet should be easier, or emotions, like raw emotions, should be easier. No, emotions are harder, right, than just the basic, whatever, robot move from there to there, robot pick that thing up. Emotions are incredibly hard, and whether that's trying to elicit emotions from a human or perceive emotions as well. So I think those are some of the those are the most interesting and fundamental challenges facing robotics.
So big set of questions. We've gone on a bit. Let us thank our panelists very much for being with us. To be continued with them afterwards and in February, where we'll have another Frankenstein Dissected event. Thank you very much for coming.